Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this morning, Lights, Camera, Action Plan 2019, Trinity Risk Solution Risk Management Action Plan Conversation. My name is Dory Seifried. I'm the Vice President of IPMG Risk Management Services, and it's nice to have you with us today. Given the condition of the long-term care industry at this time relative to liability activity, I wanted to spend just a few minutes reviewing the factors and considerations that affect us going forward with regard to liability exposure. As a reminder, a single occurrence of negative resident outcome can result in double consequences for a facility. We can get a survey deficiency with civil monetary penalties and all the headaches that go with that, as well as that same negative resident outcome driving a potential liability insurance claim. Implementation of risk management strategies aimed in key areas can minimize the facility and TRS's program's exposure to what I affectionately refer to as the double whammy. When we consider the potential for a workers' comp claim resulting from that same single occurrence of negative resident outcome, then the exposure could exponentially increase to that of a triple whammy. So we have a lot riding on how we manage, how we try to avoid negative resident outcome, and then how we manage it once it occurs, how we communicate with the family. And as you know, the industry and the public is bombarded with plaintiff attorney commercials, billboards, outrageous claims that entice somewhat dissatisfied families to come in and talk about what's happened to their resident at the hands of the big bad nursing home. Risk are results when resident care events or circumstances result in negative or adverse outcomes. The outcomes may have been preventable or avoidable, or risk results when they were not avoidable. However, the event has caused a disruption or it has exaggerated a poor relationship with the family or an unestablished relationship with the family, as in the case of new admissions or families who are out of the area. Therefore, there is not an opportunity to build a relationship with the family. And what complicates the risk situation is the fact that the facility may not have sufficient documentary evidence to defend itself. How then can we minimize the risk of risk? Well, we need to set families up to be satisfied with us, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. We want to implement strategies that can optimize the quality of resident care and safety to avoid potential negative resident outcomes. And we want to ensure that documentation clearly reflects the strategies that we've implemented, and as a result, will enhance our defensibility in the event of a liability claim. Increasing that family satisfaction, minimizing negative resident outcomes, and improving documentation so it adequately defends us improves survey results as well as reduces the likelihood of those liability claims. As a direct outgrowth of what I just discussed, for 2019 and 20, the TRS Risk Management Action Plan was developed to address those areas. And we call these our three focus areas. Now, you'll recognize them because they've been a focus of attention in terms of our services over the past number of years. However, we have adjusted and solidified our approach to these three areas by establishing identifying and establishing protocols that we will be using in a standardized fashion across our membership. Because although all of our members are implementing various strategies in varying degrees in these three areas, there hasn't been sufficient progress in some locations or in some areas to really adequately defend the facility, to protect the individual member, and to protect the program as a whole. So we're moving toward a more standardized approach and providing tools and resources and protocols to assist facilities in establishing specific strategies. Again, the focus areas are family satisfaction management, falls prevention and management, and defensive documentation. How we're going to implement the 2019-20 initiative is through, as I just mentioned, IPMG Risk Management Services developing and implementing standardized protocols and sharing them in the three focus areas for use by TRS members, being more specific about the strategies in all those three areas that we found to be the most successful. Consulting team and I will provide training locally and remotely so that in addition to the consultants, there can be facility trainers related to the focus areas of the protocols. Depending on the component of the focus area, training may commence with leadership personnel through a combination of, as I said, remote and on-site delivery of the training. And then it'll proceed, again, depending on the component and the area and the facility's existing status with that area, will proceed to involve unit-level personnel. Remotely, on-site delivery may be in the traditional classroom setting or with real-time monitoring, mentoring, which we found to be extremely successful. And then the consultants can assist facilities in monitoring their implementation of the different protocols and their achievement of action plan goals and objectives. For today, we are going to be doing an overview of the critical components within each of the three primary focus areas. We're going to be talking about a new concept for us, and that's a scoring strategy for the components and the benefits to the individual member and to the program, and to us as your service provider. We're going to be discussing how progress tracking can ensure improvement, and then overall members' ability to benchmark their performance against other members within the program. So let's talk briefly about the various components that we will be addressing under the Family Satisfaction Management Program. And we intend to follow up this webinar with more in-depth presentations regarding each of the three focus areas. For today's purpose, I will be reviewing the components in general. So if you feel at the end of this that you don't understand or need more explanation of various components within any of the areas, please sit tight. Your consultant will be walking you through that, providing you with resource materials, and we will have additional webinars in the near future to discuss each one in detail. The first component under the Family Satisfaction Management Program that we would like to facilitate with our members is the provision of staff awareness training. We really want to provide staff with a better concept of what is family satisfaction. Where do family expectations of service come from? What are realistic family expectations of the staff, and helping our staff to recognize what is realistic for them to be providing and meeting in terms of expectations, and what's unrealistic and maybe needs to be discussed further with the family. Where does distrust and dissatisfaction come from? As you know, dissatisfaction is the primary indicator of whether a family may, in the face of a negative resident outcome, decide to go to a plaintiff's attorney. So it's important for our staff, leadership and unit level staff, to understand how distrust and dissatisfaction forms versus an engaged and trusting relationship. It's interesting for leadership staff, and it's also enlightening for unit-based staff to look at and to understand at all levels how they view interactions with the family. Do they see it as a burden? Do they see it as an opportunity to engage the family as a team member? So those are the kinds of things that we would like to see and will facilitate members providing to their staff in terms of training. Again, resource materials and protocols and scripts will be made available. We want to support realistic expectations, and the consultants will be working with the members with regard to evaluating their marketing materials. What kinds of messages overtly and subliminally are communicated with your marketing materials? And that's an area that we had previously not spent a whole lot of time looking at. Evaluation of the marketing tour script. How are your tour professionals managing questions and requests during the tour process? And we intend to either mystery shop or walk along with a tour, or take a sample tour with your admissions folks. In the course of visiting and discussing with related staff, we want to be able to do an evaluation of your pre and post admission decision promises. Oh yes, are we saying that mom will always get her hair done on Thursdays at 2 o'clock, or that various pieces of furniture will be able to be brought in, and yet when push comes to shove, that isn't possible. So we really want to make sure that and work with you to make sure that what we promise we can actually deliver. The Family Satisfaction Management Program contains a protocol for contacts with families and goals for that contact from admission day onward. And from admission day, are we covering the right information? Are we covering too much or too little? With regard to what families really want to know, we recognize that there are lots of pieces of paper that need to get signed because it's a regulation and a procedure, and there are some legalities there. But are we actually capturing and communicating the stuff that is key and pivotal to the family's comfort level? Are we using admission day as an opportunity to build a relationship versus getting the paperwork done? Are we assigning a primary contact person? And is that person a realistic or optimal choice? On day 2, are we following up with families? Are we reaching out and assuring them that the resident is managing, that we're in touch with the resident, that does that update contain quality of life information as well as their medical, physical condition? During the first week, is a meeting being held with the family specifically for the identification of mutual goals? Are we reviewing initial risk assessments and providing education regarding the risks, the clinical course that we anticipate for the resident, and the challenges that the identified risks raise as we move forward to developing those initial care plan interventions? Does that meeting during the first week contain strategies to enlist family as part of the care team so that we all feel like we're on the same side, that we have the same goals, that we want the same things for the resident? And how, during the first week, do we establish ongoing contact with the family? on an ongoing basis, are we doing something equivalent to rounds, guardian angel rounds, or the equivalent? Have we identified an individual who is the contact person on an ongoing basis for that family to communicate problems and concerns to? Are we looking for opportunities for face-to-face contact with family, or going out of our way to come up with creative ways to incorporate the family into care planning sessions, et cetera? And it's very key, are there ways, and we want to assist you in identifying ways to keep the family updated, again, with regard to the quality of life of the resident, in addition to those condition changes or medical concerns that we're required to communicate. Does the family going forward have an idea of what it's like to be that resident in the facility? We will also be working with members to establish optimal communication regarding potential risks to the family's satisfaction. So we'll be working with you to identify criteria to establish a high-risk list, to ensure that there's communication to the facility leadership of any potential risks and potential changes or declines in family satisfaction. Looking at how leadership reaches out to family members, what's communicated, what questions leadership may have about what to communicate, and also stressing that the TRS member communicates risk and potential risks to IPMG in real time so that we can work with you remotely or on-site in terms of getting the best result from an otherwise potentially difficult situation. As I said, I just zipped through a protocol that is actually somewhat involved, and we have scripts to share with you in terms of talking with families about the results of risk assessments and how to elicit their cooperation and their feeling like we're all on the same team versus adversarially, or them feeling like they have to stand up for their resident against and challenge the facility staff. Our second focus area, and you may feel like we have focused on fall prevention and management for a decade, which we have, and yet this action plan takes our facilitation and our focus to the next level by providing protocols that we have found to be the most successful and will be evaluating in terms of standardized, consistent implementation. And that starts with new admissions. New admissions from that day of admission through the first several weeks is really the danger zone. When something negative happens during that period, as you know, the facility has yet to establish a strong identity and relationship with the family, and it's difficult to establish trust that quickly. And when something negative happens, the family is much more likely to take some litigious action against the facility. So we want to identify and implement strategies that will enable us to get to know the resident and to protect the resident during that danger zone period. And that involves risk assessment, what I call going beyond the score of the risk assessment. The resident isn't just a 40 or a 30. They have very specific types of risk that we need to be able to identify, even to the point of going beyond our electronic medical record risk assessment, which may not be an optimal tool. And we have to be willing to recognize that some of those tools barely scratch the surface, or they're so generic in nature that they don't give us enough information to really do a good job of identifying the resident-specific categories of risk. So we will spend time looking at your particular risk assessment, working with you in terms of identifying additional refinements to it, and how we can enable staff to identify true resident-specific risk so that it can flow to the care plan, and the care plan team can identify immediate interventions. It may be in some residents' best interest, depending on their admission profile, to standardize some protocols based upon an established criteria that are implemented on all residents who fit that criteria for the first several weeks following admission. And we'll talk with you about that. And or how do we elicit resident-specific interventions from a risk assessment that needs to be refined. We will also work with you and staff to know how to respond when risky behavior is observed. And this is a direct outcome of our noticing that often staff are aware of fall risky behaviors, and yet care plan interventions aren't necessarily changed until an actual fall occurs. So we're going to spend time working with facilities on in-servicing staff differently. In the immediate post-fall time period, we have found that the huddle is a very effective means of getting as much information as possible from the staff who are on duty, who may have information, important clues that they don't even realize. And the huddle process is implemented in various ways across some of our membership. We want to standardize that approach to get the most bang for your huddle buck. You know, the huddle is not the nurse writing down on the huddle results page, and it's not just the nurse and the CNA collaborating. So there are definitely strategies in terms of implementing the huddle that are more effective than others, and we'll be working on that with you. Incident report completion, reviewing to make sure that you're getting the optimal information from your staff who are doing the incident report completion phase. Are you getting identification of all the clues necessary, and is your incident report being completed effectively? Are immediate interventions being implemented? Are they relevant to the type of event that just occurred? Are they reviewed the next day? Is your fall risk assessment updated? You know, most of the time we see a fall risk assessment tool being completed. However, there are no changes, there are no comments, there's no identification of anything new, so why are we bothering? And let's make that process meaningful. Most of our members have some form of post-fall investigation documentation, and we certainly want to help you identify areas of duplication that may not be necessary, or areas that are currently not included that could be vital. So we'll be working together to do that. And then 72-hour charting, which we recommend every shift for 72 hours. We'll be working with your nurses to identify all the components that should be included in 72-hour charting. We find that it's most effective when there's a daily fall review meeting, and when it's interdisciplinary and not reliant on one person, you know, whether that one person is the ADON running around trying to get information about a fall because the incident report is not completed comprehensively. We really feel that interdisciplinary post-fall review is critical. With components in front of you, like the incident report, like the huddle, access to nursing progress notes, the existing care plan. Most of you have heard us speak ad nauseum about accurate root cause identification, which continues to be probably the biggest challenge to nursing home staff within TRS and outside in the general universe. It's a tough concept, and we want to spend a lot of time not only doing additional training, but actually, you know, real-time mentoring of leadership and unit-based staff. We feel that tossing around real-life examples and working with folks and walking through examples is the best way to get people on board. how to use root cause to develop effective, appropriate, creative, corresponding care plan interventions that get to the basis of the risky behavior, and effective communication of a new intervention to unit staff. Key to the daily fall review meeting process is the assessment of family distress and therefore the facility's potential risk exposure. If we can identify that from day one following the fall, we can develop meaningful strategies to address that family distress. And then the biweekly fall review committee meeting, does it take place? Is it interdisciplinary? Does it evaluate the effectiveness of resident-specific interventions? Does it include a review of family distress and risk exposure? Were our family management strategies effective? What else may we need to do to ensure that the family understands how the event happened, what the challenges were to fall prevention, and where the facility intends to go from there in its diligence in terms of protecting the resident? And are there any systems issues that need to be put in place to prevent a reoccurrence not only for this resident, but for other residents who may be affected by the issue? And we'll be reviewing with each member how they are reporting falls and incidents with injury to IPMG risk management prior to reporting to IDPH. That prompt reporting prior to risk management in the form of me really helps us be aware of what's going on in the facility, and often we can nip potential exposure to surveyor scrutiny, but also to liability exposure in the bud. That's a lot of information, and I know I went through it very quickly. But the point being, those are the types of components that we are including in our action plan, and you will be receiving support, training, materials to train in-house, scripts as needed. Defensive documentation is key in that there are certainly times, and those times seem to be increasing in today's litigious environment, where avoiding a liability claim becomes more and more difficult. So therefore, defending the program becomes more and more necessary. And the first and probably most important tier of that defensive line is the documentation within the medical record. Without documentation that can defend the facility's position, we are then left to the strength of staff depositions. Depositions are tricky. They can go either way. The plaintiff's attorney's mission in life is to make the employee who's being deposed look stupid, and often they do, unfortunately. So what's in the medical record becomes of primary focus. With regard to our protocols that we'll be moving forward with, we will be looking for content and frequency guidelines that the facility can establish in the areas listed on this slide: admissions and readmissions. What should be in an admission progress note or other admission documents, assessments, what have you? What's a quality admission progress note? What do you expect to see in a readmission note? How many shifts do you expect to see documentation related to that admission that happened within 24 hours, 48 hours? As we've read through countless medical records, there's a lot of variation in what is included currently in admission notes, and often those touch points are not re-reviewed on subsequent shifts, and that's something that we will be providing input regarding. Change of condition is another area that we want to see content and frequency guidelines established. antibiotic usage beyond the no adverse reaction comments? How are you expecting staff to discuss and document behaviors and do follow-up? Falls, the 72-hour charting per shift, as I mentioned, and what should be included in a progress note when risky behaviors are noted by staff? Key components of defensive documentation that we will be discussing and providing training and training materials for is the top of our list is start the story at the beginning, start a progress note, make an entry at the first sign of potential or actual change, or resident expressed concern, or families expressed concern. Start at the beginning, not at the point, for example, when the resident has started on antibiotics and it's not clear even that they had symptoms suggesting they needed an antibiotic. Don't finish the story until the end. If something is important enough to make an entry about, then follow that something until it's resolved. Physician notifications can be pivotal when it comes to a liability claim, and therefore we strongly encourage including all content relayed to the physician and all instructions received from the physician. What did the physician know and therefore base their next move or their next order on? At the time of a liability claim, the MD may be subject to amnesia about what was told to them. Amazing as that sounds. Resident condition entries should be limited to assessment, treatment, observation, the resident's response to treatment, and should not include judgments, assumptions, investigation results, etc. One of the key risk management strategies that strategy themes that are included in the vast majority of our protocols and recommendations include a real-time review process. Do you look at documentation in real time as a potential or actual resident negative outcome is unfolding? Are you sure that the documentation is there, number one? Is it accurate? Is it comprehensive enough? Does it capture the story from the beginning until the end? And if you don't look as the episode is unfolding, you won't know that. And then 2 weeks later, when something hits the fan, it's much more difficult to make a late entry look legitimate. So we'll be talking at length and facilitating the creation of real-time review processes with each member. We also want to see family visitation, family involvement in care decision-making, family interaction with staff, all of that family relationship documentation versus only seeing documentation about families when there's some kind of an argument or negative interaction. I'm sorry? You can ask that question. I'm sorry. Will the slides be available? The slides will be provided from the presentation, yes. And Nikki posted on the portal. Yeah, the slides will be available on the portal, the TRS portal. Thanks for that question. With regard to defensive documentation, quality of life documentation should be present and consistently addressed, meaning how are we representing the actual life experience of the resident at the nursing home versus limiting their documented experience to medical problems, lab results, medications, and treatments administered. The resident is living at the home, and we really they are best served when we reflect what their living is like. And is documentation consistently included in your QA or QAPI process so that it is an extension of your real-time review process? It's a retrospective that facilitates that enables the facility to look back and say, you know, we're doing a good job in these areas, but we really need to take a look at this component of our documentation. So it's another avenue to narrow down your improvement strategies. Again, I want to reinforce that although these slides, which are an overview, will be available on the portal, we will be doing much more detailed and in-depth webinars regarding each of these focus areas and each of the components included in them. So let's talk a little bit about the action plan process. Of course, this is part of the sharing and implementing of the action plan, the discussion of the overview of the focus areas, which I just did, but also there'll be ongoing, as I said, training activities through webinars, through your consultants being on site with you, and a review of each of the components and the implications and the implementation strategies for those components and protocols. On-site and remote consultation and assistance will include identifying the facility, the member's current status with regard to each of those three areas and each of the components within the area. I will discuss how we will be reflecting that identification. With the member, we will be prioritizing what action should be taken next after the current status is identified. What is the most challenging? What do we want to take on first? What needs a tweak versus what needs to be a full implementation? We want to ensure that there is movement and positive movement toward improvement through the assignment of responsibility. Who is going to take responsibility for implementing a particular component, or taking step one in the implementation of a particular component, or what is the consultant going to bring to the table during the next on-site visit, or what is the consultant going to forward so that the facility trainer can take the next step in moving the process forward. And then we will ensure that there's ongoing assessment of the member's forward movement on a topic, on a component, or a particular area. So one of the key differences in the process itself is the concept of scoring. This is new for us with TRS. I can guarantee you that scoring is absolutely not intended to be punitive. There is no punitive attachment to this whatsoever. Our intention is to enable the member and the consultant to identify the problem components. Out of all of falls management, how does the consultant and the facility know where to place its initial emphasis, its initial focus, most of its energy? If we can't distinguish achievement, or I can use the word compliance, that sounds like regulatory compliance, but for lack of a better word, how do we identify the degree of compliance from one area to the other so we know how to most effectively and economically channel our attention and our activities? So that's one of the biggest advantages to assigning a scoring methodology to the various components in each one of the focus areas. It also facilitates member self-evaluation. How does leadership staff know if there's forward movement other than hearing from us in a very narrative kind of way? So this helps facilities know where they're at from visit to visit. Is there forward movement or not? If not, why not? What's the root cause of stagnation? Is there something in addition that the consultant can do to move that area forward? Are there some adjustments in assignment of responsibility that need to take place to move that area forward? So we believe that scoring brings a lot of positives to the table and makes us all more efficient. So the scoring will occur during each visit. This is not a rocket science approach to scoring. I didn't need a computer to set this up. But it is workable, and it does distinguish between not being present at all or not being implemented at all to fully and consistently being implemented with some, statistical relevance and significance. So a 0 on a score on the scoring tool that we use, which lists all the 3 focus areas and all the components that we'll be working with you on. A 0 means either you don't have the protocol yet, or you have it in theory, but it's really not implemented at all. A partial includes a score of between 1 to 3, so 1, 2, or 3. The protocol exists, and it's partially implemented to varying degrees, 1 being barely, 2 being somewhat, but maybe inconsistently, and 3 is, it's implemented quite a bit, not fully, but you're heading totally in the right direction. And 4 means you've got the protocol and it's fully and consistently implemented, and that's fabulous. So the scoring, as I said, will occur during each visit, sometimes based on your member-specific action plan and prioritization of what actions will be taken between the first and the second, or the second and the third visit, or what have you. Some areas may stay the same in their score because we haven't touched them, and that hasn't been on our agenda, our mutual agenda. So you'll notice, with a different color or what have you, that, there's been some movement on a prioritized area. The other value to the scoring methodology is the concept of benchmarking. Reports will be made available to members that identify the members' cumulative points in a particular, in the focus area and each component, and a percent of compliance in each of these areas as well. And I have a sample I'll get to in a second. In addition to the 3 large areas and the points and the percents attached to that, we'll be including some of the important or essential components within each of the 3 areas. For example, in falls, I would be inclined to include root cause because it's an essential component, and you'll be able to see how the facility is doing in the area of root cause, and then relative to other members. You'll be able to compare yourselves overall and within those essential components to other members in terms of benchmarking. How are you doing? Other facilities' identities will not be shared. And there's a sample. So in the first column, we have a member. We've identified ABC member, but everybody else is anonymous. Under the falls, for example, I've identified, for the purpose of this example, the daily meeting as an essential component, root cause as an essential component, and IPMG notification. So ABC member is doing really well with implementing the daily meeting. It's not fully actualized, but it's absolutely a consistent part of the life of the members' fall approach. Root cause is a struggle, and IPMG notification, they are absolutely consistent. So based on the score assignments under falls, the whole falls category, they have an overall score of 55, and that reflects a 53% overall achievement with the components included in the area of falls. You'll notice that the second member, who shall remain anonymous, is doing even better in having the daily meeting and all the components that we subscribe to the daily meeting. Root cause is even more of a struggle, and they don't call IPMG with IDPH reportables at all. If you go to the bottom of that column, TRS averages, and here's where benchmarking can come in, as well as an identification of where the program stands. And where the program stands overall is a huge, knowing that is a huge help to us, because we can then develop program-wide resources in the area of additional training or resource materials that address the majority of members in very specific ways. So here we have overall for TRS, the daily meeting, and it's not just about having a meeting, it's about including the right stuff in the meeting. The daily meeting is moving in the right direction. Root cause is still a huge challenge across the membership. And IPMG notification is significantly compliant. Overall, the program as a whole is in the 49th percentile in terms of falls management. So there's a lot of area for improvement. I would suspect significantly in the daily meeting and the root cause areas. Moving on to family satisfaction, as an example, ABC member is doing some training, but not really hitting the topics that we're stressing. They most often do not meet with the family during the first week to talk about risks and challenges. The quality of life phone call occurs, but it's not consistent. And as you can see at the bottom, in terms of TRS averages, training is not happening. It's less than a 1. That first week risk meeting is pretty much not happening, and the quality of life phone call isn't either. Risk identification, however, the members appear to have pretty strong strategies in place with regard to identifying risk and taking action. Defensive documentation is a struggle, as you can see if you go down to the TRS averages. Policies and procedures, start to finish style of documentation and real-time reviews is a challenging area, and defensive documentation is a big concern, especially because of its impact on claims and claim settlement. So these are real live numbers. It doesn't reflect. I had to take a cut, out of the whole report to show the top and the bottom, but these are the TRS averages are real numbers based upon our first scoring go through. So there were some interesting and some predictable results, but it validates what are some of our concerns, and it identifies some that we haven't identified yet or taken some action on. So we're hoping that you find this as valuable as we do in terms of self-assessment and our ability to channel resources where the need is greatest. Does anybody have any questions? Raise your hand if you have a question. A little webinar humor. Very little. If questions come to mind after the webinar is over, please feel free to get in touch with me. And the webinar itself and the slides should be available on the TRS portal. By the end of the week? Yeah. You heard it here first. If there are no other questions, I appreciate your participation today. We look forward to the TRS action plan and supporting all the members in their efforts to protect their families and residents, their facilities, and the TRS program. Thanks again. Have a great day.